All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Janest. I'm on the communications team here at LMI. I'm with Bettina, Kolleda, the Director of Business Transformation. We're scheduled to start here in about 1 minute, so we're going to let some folks trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right, we have reached noon. As I mentioned, I'm Adam Janest. I'm on the communications team here at LMI. I am honored to have Bettina Kolleda, the Director of Business Transformation, join us. Bettina leads our business transformation practice area within LMI. This is the first in a series of what we're calling quick thoughts, about 10 to 15-minute discussion on a variety of topics. This topic is the future of digital and business transformation in the federal space. So Bettina, welcome.
Thank you, Adam. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So just to kick off the discussion, I think a lot of folks have heard of business and digital transformation, but they may not know what it means. So can you give a brief sort of 101 overview of what business and digital transformation means?
Yeah, sure. So it can seem like this very nebulous term, and it's at times hard to define. It seems like this huge thing, but really for us, it's we consider this to be a fundamental change to an organization enabled by technology that helps to improve mission effectiveness, efficiency, or reduce risk. It can be a large-scale transformation, like providing an enterprise data management strategy for an organization, or really something small like a process improvement initiative or automating a financial process, for example. So it really comes in a variety of different sizes and forms. It can also take shape as far as an organizational transformation and restructuring to meet new business needs.
That's great. So, one of the things that I've heard when folks talk about business transformation is the need to be human-centered and holistic. To my mind, that means that the individuals who are responsible for the change have to think about not only the leadership's goals and the organization's goals, but the end users and everyone in between. Can you kind of expand on what we might mean when we say a human-centered and holistic approach to business transformation?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we think about what kind of technology we need to bring in to transform. And although that's a really important part of the conversation, we have to think about the people. Who's going to be using it, why this change is necessary, how it impacts their day-to-day, and get them engaged in both the solutioning and the rollout of these new initiatives so that they feel like they're a part of it. They don't feel like this is happening to them. I think oftentimes we forget about that piece or we think of it as minor, but really we found that something like 70% of transformational efforts are not successful if we don't pay enough attention to the change management, the training, and the communications that really needs to go on around these types of efforts. So I would say the people focus is really important, both in creating, developing, and then delivering the solution for our clients.
Yeah, if you could expand on that a little bit. So, what are some best practices as organizations are building out a change management strategy for engaging those end users? The first thing that comes to mind is maybe surveys or focus groups, but what have you seen as effectively incorporating all of the stakeholders into a transformation effort?
Sure. So I'll give you an example from our DoD space. There's a client that was very successful in working with us in a pretty large digital transformation initiative to implement a new platform impacting thousands of users and ingesting almost $1 trillion worth of data. And for that effort, the focus started with how do we identify the right stakeholders and even identifying pockets of resistance within our stakeholders, and how do we bring those folks in? So we stood up some working groups of beta testers. We started working with folks from a strategy perspective as well to figure out what are the end results that we're looking for? How do we measure success and set up metrics around that? And then really engaged throughout the process with them using human-centered design techniques and our UI UI UX expertise to design and develop a solution that was going to meet their requirements while also engaging in a communications campaign to, communicate to the users, what are the benefits of this? Why should you be excited about this? How can you be a champion for this initiative? And then carrying that all the way through the scaling of the technology that we brought in. So that's one good example, I think, of how it works well and where the emphasis needs to be put in.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting that you mentioned pockets of resistance. I've heard that culture change is a key element to a successful business transformation and digital transformation. I think that might be surprising to some folks that, you know, um, increasingly, I think our work is digitally enabled, right? And so the way that we've done things may need to change when the organization decides it needs to go in a different direction, say from an enterprise IT perspective. Can you talk about the importance of culture in an effective digital transformation?
Yeah, sure. So I think change is pretty much constant right now, especially in the environment that we're operating in the last 2 years, where a lot of our folks, are in various parts of the country working remotely in hybrid environments. And that's had a large impact culturally on a lot of the clients we support. I think identifying that and providing ways to stay engaged with employees, providing training opportunities, providing ways for them to network with other folks within the organization, and really explaining the why behind each of these changes really makes this a lot more. It makes it a lot easier for people to adapt, and also just developing that culture of change. Change is here to stay. We're here to support you, provide training, provide avenues and tools for you to work in this new environment, but it is something that we all have to get used to and kind of roll with at this point.
Yeah, and I would assume, especially after COVID, right? I know that we've seen a number of agencies, even agencies that traditionally, work on site, let's say in classified environments, have had to find ways to transition how they do business, maybe how they've been doing business for decades, in order to continue to meet mission requirements. I know that there's been some reporting about, for example, NGA having to figure out how to continue to perform in an unclassified environment with a distributed workforce. I'm curious if you've seen an uptake in the interest in business and digital transformation post COVID.
Yes, definitely. I think we're getting a lot of interest in that area, and especially in how we use tools and technologies like the cloud, and then our human-centered design collaboration tools, which there are many, to engage with folks, but also give them access to data securely. And then working with both a workforce that is remote and in person as well, depending on the client. So we've gotten a lot of interest around that, been able to provide a lot of support there. And I think this is the way it's going to be from now on. This is the way of the future and the way of the now. So just engaging, helping our clients use the tools that they already have, but also bringing in some other capabilities that are helping to support and maintain effectiveness and engagement throughout the workforce in this time.
Yeah, that brings me to thinking about, okay, so I've heard, this is important. I know that this is sort of a requirement in the future to think about how organizations are going to transform and enable themselves digitally. What are some of the top things that leaders need to be asking themselves, especially when their organization brings a problem to them? Let's say, for example, you have different parts of an organization that need to collaborate that historically have been stovepiped, and they've got, their own independent data structures, maybe their own IT systems, and you may have vendors come in and say, well, we can connect everything together. What are some of the key decision elements that leaders need to be thinking about before they embark on, forming an acquisition strategy to solve these stovepipe problems?
I think engaging with those various stakeholders in an effective way, and really coming up with a strategy without spending too much time on that part of the process, but putting enough emphasis on it to where you know where you're going, what your strategy is going to be, and then what your quick wins are going to be as well. And how we implement that for our clients and internally for ourselves is through rapid prototyping. That's a trend that I think a lot of the agencies and even our partners are seeing as a really effective way to test out concepts, to understand data interdependencies, to understand the effects of modernization on processes and people without spending a lot of money or time. So, and then really reducing risk and implementation as well. So I would say that's something to heavily consider is how can we test out some of these concepts? How can we take bites out of a transformation problem or challenge without spending years on a large acquisition plan or, investing millions of dollars on a significant transformation where, we have the ability to bring in prototyping, we have the ability to engage with users, we have the ability to leverage Agile and see where we might get in a month or two with a prototype or a proof of concept first.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think, you bring up the need for the federal government in general to transform how they do business, in order to most effectively leverage some of these advances in technology. I know that, agencies are very interested in artificial intelligence and machine learning. But, we've seen thought leaders say, recently, you can't just sprinkle AI and ML onto a problem. You've got to think about it holistically. And I think you brought up a great point about prototyping. I'm just curious, have you seen prototyping in the AI/ML space work within your client set, or is that something that they're still looking and exploring?
We have seen it. We've done a few prototypes in that space, and of course, AI/ML is a huge force multiplier in a lot of these efforts. I think where the prototyping becomes really useful is understanding where the gotchas are with, when it comes to data and process and the impacts where you could potentially break something. And if you break it on a small scale first, through this fail fast approach, it's a lot easier to fix and develop lessons learned for larger implementations. So we've definitely seen it and have had the ability to test out some concepts through our prototyping process internally, and with our customers as well.
That's great. I as I mentioned at the outset, we're trying to keep these relatively short. So we're right in that 10 to 15-minute window. Bettina, is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to get the message out about?
Just to emphasize some of the things we've talked about in this conversation, I think, taking small bites out of the transformation challenges that we have is really important. Leaning into low risk approaches like prototyping, but really emphasizing the people in this, right? Technology is an enabler for people. It's an enabler for missions for our clients. We can't forget about that, really generating that excitement and having a really intentional plan around communications, training opportunities, upskilling, and all of the other components we discussed during the conversation. That's what's going to make these technology investments worthwhile, and create the return on investment that we know our clients are looking for.
That's great. Well, Bettina, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone who listened in. If you're interested in learning more, obviously you can go to our website, lmi.org. You can send an email to the communications team, communications@lmi.org. If you're interested in connecting with Bettina directly, we'll make sure that happens. But thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week when we talk about the importance of the human in some of these business transformation efforts. So really appreciate it, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks, everyone.